Yeah, I think the
Oh
chairman.
my God, that's so funny, Penny.
Opens the meeting.
That is funny.
My house to play bridge. Okay.
That's funny.
Here we go.
All right, I'd like to call the November 18th, 2019 meeting of the New Canaan Board of Education to order. First up, we have Mr. Moynihan with us to organize us and move forward.
Conduct an election. It's a pleasure to be with you all. So the first order of business is to ask for nominations for the role of board chair. Do I have a nomination?
Right here. I'd like to nominate Katrina Parkhill. She's been an outstanding member of the board the last year and a half, 2 years. She has been the president of the West PTC. She's served since being on the board on the governance committee and on the communications committee. She's been an active member of the board, an active member of the community, has great connectivity with many parents in town, and I think will be a great leader of our board.
Okay, do I have a second?
I second the nomination.
Do I have any further nominations? Hearing none, I gather that's unanimous. Everyone in favor? Aye?
Aye.
All right. Do I have nominations for vice chairman?
Over here. I would like to nominate Brendan Hayes to be vice chair of the Board of Ed. As chair this year, Brendan has done, all right, start again since my mic was off. I would like to nominate Brendan Hayes to be vice chair of the Board of Ed. As chair this past year, Brendan has done a fantastic job. He well advocated for the Board of Ed budget, pointing out its efficiencies and the town's return on its investment. He shepherded the board through the town approval process and was able to do it without any additional cuts to that budget, which would have diminished the education in New Canaan Public Schools provided students. And he's built strong relationships with the town officials. He also moved forward the board's important work on the school start time and student wellness, and helped craft a process that has fleshed out the pros and cons of the various options and the complications in this process. And he helped another notable achievement, working on the agreement with the New Canaan Athletic Foundation, the Board of Ed, and the town, and that is going to serve, that's an exciting agreement, and it's going to serve generations of New Canaan students well. So I think we're fortunate to have Brendan continue on in a leadership capacity on the board. His financial capabilities are key skills on this board. He's committed to education and to New Canaan, so I couldn't be more enthusiastic than in nominating him as vice chair.
Very good. Do I have a second?
I second Brendan.
Are there any further nominations for vice chairman? Seeing none, all in favor of electing Brendan as vice chairman? All right, that's unanimous as well. And then the role of secretary. Do I have nominations for a secretary?
I'm honored to nominate Jen Richardson to continue to serve in the role of secretary. She has served on the Board of Ed since 2014, and she's been secretary since 2015. She has 4 children who have either graduated or continuing to go through New Canaan Public Schools. And she's highly engaged in our school system at all levels, not only at the Board of Ed, but she continues to be involved through the PTC. I think 2 years running prom committee chair, which is a big time commitment for anyone wondering. Color run chair more. She's on the board, has been one of the initial members of the communication committee, and worked to reformat the district website and improve communications between the district and community and parents. She is a tremendous asset to our board and in this role, and I'm honored to nominate her.
Do I have a second for Jennifer?
I second.
Are there any further nominations for secretary? Seeing none, all in favor? That's unanimous as well. So congratulations, officers. Yeah, I just want to make one comment. There's been a lot of talk about the town and the Board of Education and the school district working closer together. I would urge this board to seriously look at working with the town to try to find savings and ways to have synergies between the two. And so with that, I'm going to take my leave, but congratulations and good luck with your new terms. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good.
Slide over.
Do you want to have Katrina move anyway? Or have Katrina?
Do you want to move over? Do you want to move here, Katrina?
You can move.
Okay, whatever you want to do.
It's up to you.
You're going to give you the gavel.
You get the gavel.
At a minimum.
Try not to use it.
All right, so first up, we'll approve the minutes from the November 4th, 2019 meeting. Do I have a motion? Penny?
So moved?
Second? Julie? All those in favor? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you.
You could have liked them.
Okay, next is to review and approve tonight's agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda? Sherry? Second? Brendan? All those in favor? Thank you. Comments from the public. Do we have any comments this evening?
Nice to see you all again. As promised, I was gone for a month. My name is Jennifer DeLippi. I have 2 children in the New Canaan School District. My son Jack is in 5th grade at Saks, and my daughter Margot is at South School. And I'm looking forward to tonight, hopefully hearing about the catch-up on the events that happened last month around school start times. So without beating a dead horse, I'm here again to ask that you consider truly what is giving our students, all of our students, a fair shot at a decent day, which is no school starting before 8 a.m. There was, in the debates, I heard a comment that this was a ridiculous argument that we were having that younger children just simply get up earlier. And that was really disappointing coming from a member of the board. The fact is they don't. And every child needs a decent chance at sleep. Every child is different. We also know we have working families in this community. So if you want your child up at 6 o'clock and 12 hours of sleep, it means you have to put them to bed at 6 p.m., which is ludicrous. We aren't going for perfection. We aren't going to please everybody or solve a very complicated problem to every dotted I and crossed T. But we should, first and foremost, keep that our children are at minimum. Their sleep is the absolute focus point and the laser point in which we have. Mr. Moynihan, I saw you on the train going to work, and I asked you about this, and you looked at me stupefied, like this wasn't even a really big thing. And I was so sad, honestly, to have that, because our schools and our children are the future of this community. And if we were looking perfection, we'd want maybe bigger school lines at Saks. I pay double for school lunches because my son has to get a snack before he can get lunch. And I know that that is something we're working on. I can live with that because I know the rest of it is taken care of. I know that potentially there's a road through to Waveney allowing better facilitation of buses and cars coming into school. So we're not looking for perfection, but it lets us do the right thing.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. Moving on to reports and recognition. First, we have school start and end times update with Dr. Lutzy.
Yes, good evening, and congratulations, Ms. Parkhill, and welcome, Mr. Naughton. And congratulations, Mr. Hayes, as well, on your reelection. I think I got everybody. As we have been doing. And Jen, congratulations. You're very welcome.
And Julie?
And Julie, congratulations to everyone.
For making it to the meeting.
This is great. No, I don't want to do that.
Being a tie.
When Carl comes, we'll
Everyone has
congratulate
supported
him.
everybody else.
That's right. This is a team, and we all work together. That's a wonderful thing. All right. Well, very excited and grateful for everyone's service and the engagement with the work at hand and the things that we do here at the board. As we have for the last few months, about once a month we do an update on our school start and end times and sort of where we are. So we had hoped to be able to share this data with you, or the information with you back in October 21st, but it was just too much. As you know, on October 21st, we had over 70 people get together throughout the course of the morning in a facilitated discussion. Folks were grouped in like groups at different tables, and many of the board members were here to observe and to be able to listen, and those that weren't had an opportunity to catch up in different ways. The feedback from that session on the 21st is in front of you in a packet that I'll speak through briefly. And certainly open to questions or conversation. Where we keep hoping and looking for that very clear direction and answer, no one doesn't exist. We keep working through the challenges that exist in this question and in the school start time conversations, school start and end time, right? Because as we know, the end times often drive our start times because of the amount of time it takes to get our students home. So I am engaged in conversations with superintendents throughout the region and throughout the state. Even just this morning, I was up at a meeting around legislation and upcoming legislation, and they shared that there was a group of legislators that got together a few weeks back that talked about the decision that was made in California about the school start and end times, where California put in place legislation that says no middle schools should start before 8 o'clock and no high schools should start before 8:30. And that's going to be implemented in 2022 or 2023. It might be 2023. There are some exceptions to that as far as rural districts go and some other things, because like all states, there's a lot of variability across the state, and certainly California, and the size, the variability that's there. But there was a group in Connecticut that got together to look at that legislation and to discuss, should Connecticut move in a similar direction? The sentiment in the room today in the conversation was that they do anticipate something will be proposed. They don't anticipate an awful lot of support for it early on, but the process goes the way that it does. So I think that it's interesting to note that at a state level, there is some conversation about school start and end times as well. The conversation that we had here, again, was very rich, very intense at times. People have strong opinions about this and strong feelings about this. The challenge is not all of them are the same. But the process was to look at 3 different scenarios, and each scenario was given about 20 minutes or so for the groups to look at, think about, discuss, and to identify pros and cons. And I know in an initial draft of this, we had broken out the pros and cons by each of the groups, but feeling that it's just overwhelming and very repetitive, because many of the groups identified the same pros and cons. What I tried to do here is just sort of, without repeating them, just sort of pull out the pros and cons across the groups per scenario. So for instance, if you go to the second page, and I do believe there's extra copies over there. If you go to the second page, you'll see scenario 1. Right, so scenario 1 is the scenario where we had the 3 elementary schools starting at 7:45, and that day would conclude at 2:20. The high school would be by itself in the middle tier. We would begin at 8:20 and end at 2:55. And then the Sachs Middle School, grades 5 through 8, would begin at 9:05 and end at 3:35. And of course, these times, as we say them, there's always plus and minus factors because of what happens in reality. So when we say Sachs would end at 3:35, for instance, that would be one wave of buses for Sachs, and then there'd be another wave of buses that would come through. So we have to put times in front of you for discussion and consideration with an understanding that nothing is exact until it's actually implemented. So I asked just, a plus and minus 5 minutes, I think, is probably fair. With the understanding that our school day is 6 hours and 30 minutes long. Matter of fact, all of these scenarios assume a shortening of the high school and the Sachs 7th and 8th grade program from 6 hours and 35 minutes long to 6 hours and 30 minutes long. So that would align them with the rest of the schools in the district. So both of the scenario 1 and scenario 2 does that. Scenario 3 leaves it the same. So the groups as they had their discussion, they were then asked to chart their responses in a simple T-chart, pros, cons, and then at the end, they were asked to try to reach consensus on a rating from 0 to 10. 0 being too many reservations, we can't support this idea at all, to 10, almost none or no reservations, and this is what we think you should do. So that's the 4.36 here. So when asked to do that, some of the groups could reach consensus. Other groups were not able to reach consensus, and so instead had a vote for a 5, a vote for a 4, a vote for a 3, and in those cases, we just averaged that out to a 4 and included it with equal weighting against the other groups. Make sense? Okay. So for this scenario 1, some of the pros of scenario 1, which again is the 7:45 start for the 3 elementary schools and cascading from there, is that it moves the district closer to the recommended time for our secondary students, that it has the elementary schools running on the same schedule, with the belief that elementary students learn better in the morning and that they naturally get up early in the morning. There was some optimism that'd be better for traffic. The more sleep and a more relaxed start time for the high school students. And although I didn't include it in the chart, I would assume 7th and 8th grade as well. Oh, no, just the high school students, I'm sorry. Younger students would need morning childcare, sharing the staff in the elementary school, SACs on the same schedule, professional learning opportunities for staff, specifically at the middle school in East and West, and then the availability of elementary teachers to coach after school. So those, when people looked at that scenario, they felt that those were the positives. The concerns or the cons were focused on the students waiting in the dark, an increased need for childcare in the afternoons, reducing the sleep time for youngest learners, reduction of family time with earlier bedtimes, working parents and long commutes. There was a question about research on early start times for young students. And as we've talked about a bit, there really isn't much out there. You know, there's a lot of research around the teenage years and really the adolescent, even pre-adolescent, but when you get to the younger students, beyond the conversations we have with our staff, there's not a lot of formalized research about school start times with that age group. A concern around 5 through 8 on the same bus, and you can move down. Cost was raised as an issue. The SACs dismissal was an issue. I mentioned briefly the facility itself isn't designed to house more than 17 buses, I'd say, at the max. And when we put SACs all together on one dismissal, you really need to use the whole complement, which is about 32, 36 buses. So we'd really look at a two-wave dismissal. You don't have the problem in the morning because those buses drop and go, but you do have it in the afternoon because the buses stay on site, stage in order to load and then roll off. So we would have to look at sort of a two-phase dismissal there. Again, take a look down. Concern around older siblings and younger siblings. The question was raised about time for youth sports. And a cost that we may not consider, may not have thought about, is the staffing hours increase for non-certified staff. Because if you have that two-stage dismissal, you're elongating the day a bit. So if it's an extra 15 minutes, but when you do that over the course of the 182 days and the non-certified staff and others that we have, it could be a cost. It would be a cost. I don't know to what degree, but it would be a cost. This scenario, as you know, we anticipate is 5 or 6 buses, and each bus is about 100,000. So pros and cons, just sort of listed them, trying not to repeat, but just to put them so that you have them to sort of consider. And again, the overall score. You go on to scenario 2, where scenario 1 sort of had movement for everybody into a different tier. Scenario 2 looks to keep the same sequence, but to shift it out. So to look to improve the sleep time for students by shifting it out to make it a little bit later. So this first tier would put the high school in 7th and 8th grade at 7:45. The second tier with SACs 5th and 6th and South would be at 8:30, and then East and West would be at 9:15. So essentially you're pushing out 15 minutes in the first tier, but since you are shortening that day by 5 minutes, you're pushing just the second and third tier out 10. Okay? So some of the pros there: no elementary students would be waiting in the dark, cost neutral, close to the current schedule. Really, it was that it's an improvement over the current system, doesn't require people to really rethink things like childcare and commuting, things like that. And you can see the pros there. For the cons, big con at the top was that it doesn't solve the teenage sleep problem. And so it doesn't seem to solve the problem that we're trying to solve for, which is student health and wellness. The questions about the preschool, the learning across the elementary schools, concern about the traffic, could it make the traffic worse? And may there be a need to expand the early bird programs to even have them for the second tier if they're starting a little bit later. And again, you can take a look through here. There's concern that resonated across the teachers and the parents was the concern about an increase in early pickups at the elementary schools if the afternoon goes later, and that it could be more difficult for working parents. So this score overall was at 4.55. If you go to the third scenario, which we didn't give 20 minutes for, we shortened it to about 10 because it's our existing schedule. So it has SACs 7-8 and the high school starting at 7:30, ending at 2:05. 5th and 6th and South at 8:15, and then East and West at 9:05, and that ending at 3:35. So the pros, as you could think, or you could imagine, are that we've already solved for this schedule across the board. As far as families go, teachers, students, and others. Other things of note, there is one tier that has the ideal time. It's that middle tier, right? As we've said, if we could have a one-tier system, everyone would start at 8:15, 8:30 in the day. But we also know that that's not possible. So that's a good time. They already have that good time there. We know the traffic issues, some feedback around reduced risk of turnover by staff. There was a comment by someone who was clearly paying attention in June when we went through the survey results, who shared that the listening to students, community, and staff survey results from the spring, where the majority wanted no change when looking at those results, and they had some of that other information put there. To highlight, I think, is important to note that the district is implementing other stress reduction strategies as well, and we've talked about those here as a board, about what's going to the high school, some of the things SACS has done, and some of the others. So we're continuing to do this work. There is other work going on concurrently, all focused on student health and wellness. And you can go through and see. And then some of the cons for the existing schedule. Clearly, the largest is that it's not solving the significant health issue that we've been talking about for this time. It appears to be ignoring what the nation and others are taking seriously as the conversation continues to expand. Inconsistent learning times for elementary. There was a couple of groups actually talking about the cost of not changing, looking especially relative to other towns, the public relations piece. So what does that mean for New Canaan? Not addressing traffic issues, sports schedules could conflict with other towns as they change. And as you see it here, and the availability of teachers for advising or coaching things from east and west. So pros and cons on both sides. That scoring result for staying with what we have is the 6.23. So if you go to the last page here, I just wanted to sort of just summarize it quickly for the board's discussion and to share when we talk about the averages. It's always difficult to average averages and things like that. So I wanted to break out we had 4 different parent groups. There were 2 elementary groups, a middle school group and a high school group. And so those are their rankings, so to speak. The 4-7 is scenario 1, 2-6 scenario 2, 4-3 scenario 3. And we had 3 teacher groups. So I wanted to break that out as well. So you see the 3.1 is scenario 1, 5.7 is scenario 2, 8.4 is scenario 3. And then one of each of the other groups. Across the 3 teacher groups, we had an elementary, a middle, and a high school group. Okay. Again, important to note, we did have a community group. Mr. Moynihan was here and engaged in the conversation with us, as was Mr. Butterworth, and many others from the community. We had a group of administrators from across the district here. The clinical team got together. Again, that was a K-12 group. That was one of them. The art/athletic group included community members as well. The Park and Rec, John Howe, Steve Benko were here. Craig from the YMCA was here. We had representatives of Canaan Daycare, others. I know I've gone through the list before, but just to sort of refresh a little bit. A group of non-certified staff as well. Lauren Lisa was here. And of course, we had a group of high school students, graduating seniors who were quite invested in the conversation and had some good advice, as high school seniors often do. So I wanted to share that with you. I think that one of my big takeaways as I continue to think about this and lose sleep over it at different times, it's a complex issue. We've said that from the start. We've tried to do what we can do to try to advantage everyone. The scenarios are not necessarily coming together in order that can be advantageous to everyone. I think that it's important for us to continue to think about what makes the most sense obviously in our context, in the context of the work that is ongoing across the district, in the greater context of the state, and, other schools in our region, and to continue to listen. I'll be meeting with some folks tomorrow to talk about it a bit, and to see what the best path forward is, always keeping an open mind to, possibilities and seeking solutions that, probably there's nothing out there that's going to make everyone happy. But, as a board, one of the things that I think you do spectacularly well is focus on, what's best for kids and how do we continue to move that forward in the way that is most supportive of our work across the district. I'll catch my breath and give the board a moment to.
Thank you, Dr. Lutzy. Any questions? Joanna?
I would just ask, going back to the beginning of your presentation, when you talked about the superintendents talking about the state possibly taking a position or presenting legislation, as part of our board goals this year, it talks about activating around sort of, state legislative efforts. And my one comment is, I don't think it's ever great when the state mandates something and doesn't fund it, and we tend to have that problem in the state over and over again. This would be a massive, depending on what we choose to do or not to do, it could be a massive cost being put on the district without any remuneration from the state. So I would urge us to activate around telling the state to stay out of this issue, that it should be a local issue and that each district should be managing it as best they can. I think, one of the tenets of why this district does so well is we manage it locally and we have a lot of control locally. And so I would urge people to talk to their legislatures, and we should, as a board, kind of like we did with regionalization, say, this is a local issue and you need to stay out.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as part of that district goal, I'm on the CAPS Legislative Committee, which is the meeting that I was at this morning where I had that, again, very preliminary information. There was a conversation, and there's a feeling that they anticipate somebody will bring something forward. But yeah, it's never too early to have the conversation, and I'll continue to report back to the board around that and other legislative issues that come. So.
Unless they're willing to pay for it, and then we can have a different conversation about it. But
Sherry?
So thank you for this summary, which shows that there is no clear answer. I'm just wondering if you've had the chance to look into Norwalk Public Schools and if you could summarize for the board how they were able to shift their system to 8 a.m. at a cost of $500,000. If you've had the chance to do that, or if you could.
Sure, I can give a high level, just bit of feedback. I wish I had that with me, and I don't. But as I understand it, as they're planning, they're looking at an increase of 5 or 6 buses, with the understanding that Norwalk has 2 high schools, so they've got more community high schools versus the one large one where everyone travels to. So that helps a bit for that bus travel time. They have many more schools than we do, and they do have many more walkers than we do as a percentage of their overall school. As I recall, they have 3 tiers, and then they have a 4th sort of, because they have another elementary that runs 8 to 4. One of their elementaries is an all-day, year-round school that they're implementing as well. And what they've done is they've moved what they called the late and the early elementaries to be in the first tier around 8 o'clock. And then they're able to get their second tier, which is their high school and some of the others, by around, I think it's around 8:30. But I'll have to take a look specifically, and they're still working through it. I think the bottom line is it's about 5 or 6 buses is what they anticipate the cost being, and they are sort of moving all of their, I think, 13 elementaries and other schools around in order to make this happen. The constraint that I don't believe they have that we have is the time and distance from the schools being located in one end of town.
It's much more compressed.
And getting across to the other side of town. So I think that's helping them to problem solve around it a bit. I'd be glad to get the specific information for you.
I've been asked that question several times. I think it'd be.
I think they're still working on it.
It'd be helpful for our community to understand, and I agree, the Norwalk Public Schools is much more complex and with the 2 high schools. But it would be nice to have like a succinct answer to that for people to understand.
Yeah.
Like, why can't we do what they just did?
I think they have 12 elementary. How many elementaries?
think it's 13 elementaries,
13
I believe. Again, don't quote me, I
Yeah.
want to have it in front of me. I think that at the highest level, having 2 high schools in different parts of town shortens the travel time for the buses, and then having that many elementaries that are also neighborhood schools shortens because it's all about the time it takes to leave a school, to go to the first pickup or drop off, drop all those students off, and get the bus to the next school. It's that 45 minutes at the end of the day that drives the tiers, and they don't need 45 minutes. So if you do that in 25 minutes, then we could radically change things. But we can't in our town because of the size of the town and the fact that just about every road is 25 miles an hour, and our buses have to do the speed limit. So, I mean, I think that ultimately is it, but I'll verify that to make sure that that's that. And I don't think their solution to what they're working on has gone for approval yet. I think this is their preliminary work, is that 5 to 6 buses and what that might take. But I think they're continuing to work on it as well.
Brendan?
Yeah, so I agree with you, Deanna, in terms of, not having a mandate that sort of comes down from the state. At the same time, there is this issue that we sort of have to deal with, which is an inefficiency when, some schools in our DERG, against whom we're competing in athletics and other things are at, one end time and we're at a different end time. So it would be great. I mean, it's a tough enough issue just in New Canaan. But I just wanted to highlight that issue that, at a certain point, it's going to be helpful for all the schools to have roughly the same end times, at least in high school, so that we can eliminate any sort of inefficiency, which I know exists today, right? Like when we play Greenwich, for example, when I guess it's most pronounced when you're dealing with Fairfield playing Greenwich, just given the travel times. But that's something that would be great to figure out if we can as as kind of within Fairfield County. But
I am a part of a working group at CES that has superintendents, again, from the region and north a bit, but throughout the FCAC and the CES region, which is our RESC, and we're talking about this together. But one of the challenges is the local nature of the consideration because of the dynamics of each individual town. So what works for one won't work for another because they're up against a different set of constraints. But at least we're talking about it, and it's a conversation that's occurring at just about every district, whether it's a public conversation or something that superintendents are just talking when they're in the room with others or principals and what have you. But it is something, everyone's aware of this, which is a good step.
just one other thing, at the risk of being extremely unpopular, one of the issues that I think in particular middle school kids in New Canaan have to deal with is being on fields or in gyms or in rinks, pretty late at night. And so I think, engaging, I'd like for us to engage with the community more, really the leaders in those, athletic organizations to see if we can bring them in and, talk to them about what we're trying to do and what we'd like them to try to do. It's not easy because there's limited field time, there's limited ice time, but at the same time, we got to make sure that kids are healthy. So regardless of what we do with start times, I just think it's a huge part of what our kids are doing on a daily basis, and it's something that I think we should be talking about as a community.
Julie?
So Brian, thank you for putting this all together. I was wondering how you were going to be able sort of numerically to coalesce all that data. One of the things that I'm struck by is, of course, for scenario 3, how much higher that seems than the other two. My concern as I read through it, though, as I look at the pros, so many of them have to do with the fact that there is no change. That is the stated pro, is that there's no change, whether it's no change in sports, maintains job opportunities, known traffic issues, successful currently. So I just think as a board, it makes it continues to make it tough for us because while this scenario scores high, it's all dependent on sort of comfort, almost inertia, the safety, and what we know. And so I just think as a board, we really have to, continue to, of course, listen to the input, but also know that I think in general, people are going to drift towards the known. And, and even looking at the participation groups, the teachers, of course, scored that the highest. I mean, extremely high. And the parent group, was a middle of the road. But anyway, it's just, I'm sort of pointing out the obvious, but I think also we just don't want to be too swayed by that super high number.
Yeah, I was just going to say the numbers when you're dealing with, the selection of people that we brought in and a relatively small number of people, the numbers are not statistically significant.
Right.
So,
Right.
We haven't done all the math, but that would be my guess. We need Carl here, actually. But
Although doesn't it reinforce the early results that we got?
yeah, I think
It reinforces
does,
the
yeah.
survey that did have statistically significant surveys.
Well,
So-
yeah, and there were different
Yeah.
different things in that survey too. But
Okay, Sherry?
Well, so before we jump to the conclusion that it reinforces an earlier, I mean, we put forth two alternate scenarios that received fairly low support rankings. I guess my question would be, do we as a board need to go back and re-examine any other scenarios to put forth? I mean, one, for example, that has earliest start time is 8 a.m. for any school. I'm just throwing it out. I'm not saying we go back to the drawing board, but I'm just saying that what this tells me is, and Julie summarized it well, that there doesn't seem to be strong support for any of the two alternate scenarios proposed. And there is right now favoring no change, but I think we started with this because the current schedule wasn't satisfactory for the health and wellness of our kids. So I'm just wondering if we need to go back and reconsider any other scenarios.
So I'm not prepared to share specific information about it, but we have continued to prototype different scenarios. I think ultimately, a big takeaway is that when the decision is made, it's not going to be all that popular. I think
It's not one solution fits all.
Yeah, because I don't know that that's really a statement against the individual scenarios as much as it is that, as Julie was saying, there is a bias towards the known, and that makes sense. And we've all solved for it in a variety of ways, in our world. But we also have identified that, maybe there's a way to do it better, and so we want to keep looking for a way to do that better. So we've looked at some things, like for instance, flipped the conversation to be, what does it look like if no child is picked up before 7 a.m.? Like just period. And that's, what does that look like? And so we're still sort of piecing that together. Also, on the other end, what's the latest that some of the schools in our area go to school? Some of the third tier, and Ridgefield has a fourth tier. So what's the latest that those schools go? And what are the pros and cons of that? And is that something we should consider? So we continue to do that. Much to the dismay of Roy and our transportation manager, who is really a very detail-oriented person, as you know, and who develops out those scenarios for us. But we are using the word prototyping in a way because it's really, we're looking to use a design-based approach where we know what our problem is, we know what our constraints are, and we continue to sort of piece together what seems to make the most sense. Soon we'll be able to bring forward a couple of other things to consider. I don't think that it's going to be a case where, and I think the board has probably been aware of this from the start, that we could put a scenario out and have, hear resounding cheers from across town. I think it's going to be, hey, we've looked at everything, we believe this is the best and most appropriate way to do this. It solves for X and, maybe doesn't give us all of it, but improves things. Because that's ultimately the goal, is to improve things for our kids. So we're continuing to look at, what can be the best thing. But I do agree. I mean, we asked people to do it, so we put the numbers here, and I think it's a discussion point. And even I putting this together, looking at font sizes and things, and I didn't want to, I want to be
Numbers
as
are huge.
unbiased as possible, in trying to present, because it's also a snapshot of the people in the room and the conversations they're having, and I understand there's some people that didn't want to put pros down on a scenario because they didn't want the board to pick that scenario, and so there were lots of things going on, lots of conversations, but it's another data point. As we've said from the start, it's not going to tell you what to do, but it's going to help to shape and inform. So we are still, again, prototyping those different scenarios with the understanding that the thing that's not changing regardless of the scenario are the constraints that we're working around. But we continue to do it. And we will be ready to share that in a few weeks.
Sorry. I just want to respond. I think that's absolutely the right thing to do, to continue to look at those prototypes. Also, I do want to underscore what Brendan said. I think we need to put more focus on the whole ecosystem, because I think we need more recognition and awareness that if we are able to move forward with a change, there isn't a magical start time number that's going to make every child in this community have the right amount of sleep. I mean, there's just so much wrapped around this ecosystem that we need to start to address, and with some force. So I would encourage us to kind of bring that discussion along with the actual start time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we have been, and we've had some conversation with the board about some of the steps that we've taken, right? When we look at the high school and the attempts there around limiting homework, making earlier the time that students submit work that's due, the collection of cell phones even when they walk into the doors to help with, in each classroom to help with some of that concentration, the no homework weekends at SACS and the high school that occur over some of the holidays and other weekends and things. So absolutely, I mean, all of those things matter. All of that contributes to our students and improves their wellness, and also the culture of, we value the kids that are in front of us, the work they're doing, and all of it, the whole child in all of our schools.
Thank you. Any other questions? Bob?
Yeah. So I'm new to this, so I'm trying to catch up. But what is the goal to kind of get this thing figured out, put to bed, voted on, and decide? Do we have a timeline?
Timeline, sure. So we've talked about in the middle meeting in December. We have a meeting every Monday, the first 3 Mondays in December. That middle meeting is a budget workshop.
Yep.
And so the board has been talking about at that workshop having discussions specifically about, more around pros and cons and costs and those things, a little bit more around this, so that at that third meeting in December, we could have enough direction one way or the other to know what if anything, to include in our budget.
So you'd have all those
That's been our
other
target.
alternate scenarios worked out by then that we could look at?
Sure, we'll have plenty to talk about, sure. Yep. I mean, there's as many scenarios as you can think of, right? But we'll have all that we're ready to talk
It's as
about.
many as
We'll
you
have
think are
ready.
viable, I guess, right,
Yeah.
at the end of the day.
And, it's, we'll have the cost conversation, but also the, benefit, not benefit conversation for each of the kids at the different levels and things like that.
Okay.
Yep. And if you have questions or thoughts or whatever leading up to that, certainly let me know.
Okay. Penny?
So I also am in favor of looking at other scenarios. I'm not sure that I think there is a bias in favor of what we're doing now. I think if we were actually designing this without having done it a 7:30 start for the high school, there's no way we would come up with that as our preferred solution. But the town has, made that work as well as it can. So, but I'm a little concerned about the timing of not getting any other scenarios until the board workshop. And if it's at all possible, I'd like to see some of these other scenarios, which I think they're sort of tweaks on, but every 5 minutes is huge, at our first meeting in December, so that we can get a little bit more feedback. It's been very instructive to me, all the feedback we've gotten on scenario 1 from people that would be affected. And so I think we want to allow for some more feedback. So if we can possibly get the scenarios, even if we don't have all the details worked out, I think that would be beneficial to the process.
Sure. Sure. We'll share what we have. Glad to. Sure.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? All right. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Moving on to the statement of accounts with Dr. Keating.
Thank you. So tonight, we're going to break with tradition, and we're going to give you an update on 3 fiscal years. So we thought we would have more to talk about in terms of the statements by doing that. So just briefly, we wanted to talk about the close of FY 2019. The audit committee is getting very close to approving the CAFR, which is the Comprehensive Annual Audit Report, Financial Audit Report. And so there's a few things that go into that. Our piece of that deals with our financials. There are no audit adjustments for us this year again, which is good. So the financial statements that you received back in September financially are pretty much intact. The Audit Committee did complete through their auditors, the Single Audit Act on our grants, and those all checked out fine as well, so there's no adjustments there. You will remember, though, that we did take out from the one Title II grant, $221,000, that was transferred to the town's general fund. That transaction took place as well. So just a few things I want to point out to you, because the MD&A, which is part of the CAFR, the Management Discussion and Analysis, there was two things the Audit Committee kind of highlighted in that report. One of them was the fact that all of our accounts basically balanced out. They thought we did great auditing, or great budgeting rather. And the fact of the matter is that we transferred from every account that we had variances in, positive variances in, so that we could cover the tuition out of district account that was over budgeted last year, and we still needed $166,000 from the excess cost grant. So that kind of looks odd when you look at it because it's zero, like we balanced out on everything. So we tried to explain it as best we could through the MD&A. And so that will be probably discussed, I think, at some of the boards because it popped out at the Audit Committee. The other thing that they talked about was the fact that we did receive the insurance payment of $500,000 for food service. So we're going to add a note in the MD&A for that because it does show the increase in the fund balance for that amount, and it isn't designated for anything. Other than that, I think that we are in good shape as far as our information goes in the CAFR, and the Audit Committee is scheduled to approve it on December 3rd. Any questions on that? I'm sorry, I'm taking over for you. Okay. The second piece is the statement of accounts. So this time around through October 31st, you have the full statement of accounts. They include both the operating fund, food service, the grants funds, all the special funds for rental, school donations, and the summer program. We do not have any transfers in this report because we make our first transfer as of the December 31st report, and that is after the reforecast. We reforecast out all of our accounts. However, this report does include in it updated encumbrances. So as you look through the various accounts, especially for salaries, you're going to see any account that can be encumbered is encumbered now. So you have a much better sense of where we're going to stand financially by line item. You'll see a few negatives. There's a reason for that. We budget for all the unaffiliated staff in one account that rolls up to the teacher's account. And through the reforecast, because those raises are given in June, we reallocate those out. So the negative balances will be wiped out through the reforecast. One thing you should be aware of, that we do know about right now, is tuition out of district continues to be a challenge for us. Bill did go back and did rather extensive work on reforecasting that account out for the rest of this year. And it does appear that we're going to have about a $300,000 shortfall right now. And that can grow, or if kids leave the district, can come down a bit. But historically, it has grown beyond that. So we wanted to make you aware of that. Now, we may have room within the budget to shift funds. We won't know the exact amount that we can shift until we do the reforecast, but we thought it's important to bring to your attention. On a positive note, facilities have given us some challenges in the last few years with unanticipated repairs. We didn't see a lot of that this summer. And my thought is that over the last several years, we've been really investing in the facilities, taking care of things, and I think it's starting to turn on us. I think we're taking a positive turn on that particular item. And those are the two items, that the tuition out of district and facilities, that give us concern. If you move on to the first supplemental is the cafeteria fund. We're actually doing very good in the cafeteria fund this year. Sales are up, I think, in a significant way. Participation has increased significantly. We are, after 2 months into the year, $92,000 as a positive to the fund. Now that'll go down like in months like December when we're paying salaries out and we don't have sales to go with it. We pay benefits and so forth. So, but still, we're very encouraged that we do have a good margin in that account. And it's going to give us some good information as we go to put the capital plan together for this particular account to replace a lot of big-ticket items like refrigerations and stoves and heating units and serveries and those kind of things that are coming due, especially at the elementary level. We're encouraged by the fact that we'll have some fund balance for that. Moving on to the grants are very close to what we anticipated this year. We do not have all of the grant award letters in. It's not unusual for that to happen. They usually come in late fall. So the commitments to these grants aren't there, but the state continues to fund them. So we request funds and they do distribute them to us. It's not unusual to have a negative number as it shows revenues are less than expenditures through to the end of the year because we actually ask for reimbursements. It's a reimbursable grant. So we spend the money, the exact amount we spend, we ask for reimbursement. It's a 30-day lag. So very typical as in the past, seeing that. But the grants are right over that $1 million mark, which we've had in the past. And then finally, moving on to facilities donations in summer school. The facilities accounts, we have very few rentals through the end of October. Our busiest season really is in basketball, the indoor facilities during basketball. So that's pretty much on track. You'll see donations is showing a net loss, and the reason for that is we receipted in the donations last fiscal year. They carry over because we don't spend them within all the money within the same fiscal year. We actually received a pretty significant donation at West that was expended over the summer for the outdoor theater. So that will balance itself out once we start to look at the comparison to actual budget. And the summer school program ran a nice profit this past year, so we don't have any issues there. So is there any questions on the current year?
Any questions?
So, can I just ask, do you think it's been helpful to have specialized maintenance staff in terms of just making sure they're on top of, all of our equipment? Do you think that's been impactful from a, reduction of cost standpoint?
Yeah, I honestly do, based on a lot of experience. But,
yeah.
When you're able to diagnose, properly diagnose an issue that happens and then call in the right people if you can't correct it yourself, you're really controlling the service that you're procuring. In most cases that we have here, unless it's a really major job where heavy equipment is coming in, like our chiller. We had a chiller that went down in this building last spring, $20,000 piece of equipment coming in. You have to have somebody work with the staff to do that. The good news is we have an HVAC mechanic who is a master. He's a master mechanic. And he gives us very good advice. He helps us spec things out so that we do the right job, the proper job, but it's also done in a very timely manner. We keep the equipment running. And they also help us a lot with the PM schedules. We just put in a new work order system last spring, and it's really expedited things for us. We're really in a good groove. So the schedules come up. We know 2 months ahead of time we're going to be doing filters. We order them. We get them scheduled. They're done. I mean, it's really taking care of being good stewards. So,
That's great.
yeah.
Thank you.
Any questions?
So we just wanted to finally give you an update on next year's budget. So we have been deep in budget for the last 4 weeks, 5 weeks, whatever it was. So just to remind you, the basis of our budget is really based on the board's assumptions that you approved for our budgeting, which come off of our goals and objectives. And they're intertwined with, of course, our enrollment. So the enrollment projections were presented last meeting. We had those slightly earlier than that for next year. So those are used as a real key piece of our forecasting. Then we look at existing program, which we did this year. We have some modifications based on our needs there. And then any program improvements. And that's really the basis of everything we do. And we look at our fixed, like, health insurance and where that's going, and we get advice on all of those things. So we've been working on those figures and those numbers for the last month. Last week, the administrators and managers gave us their staffing changes based on enrollment and any program changes that we had, and their non-salary requests. And that was for the operating budget, but also for the capital budget. So one of the things that we do is Jill and I go to the schools and we talk to all the schools about technology. We have a comprehensive technology plan. We talk about it in detail with the administrators, and we really prioritize what they need, because it's always higher than, of course, what we have. It's a fun process, but we always are educated by that process, and that's part of the capital planning. And I do the same thing with Dan on facilities. So we've done that over the last month. We have a lot of very good information on that. We also have the comprehensive MEP study that's being finalized right now. We have a few pieces of it. That's being done by Van Zelm, and they have looked at all of the mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems. They've done that in conjunction to energy conservation, though. It's been a key point of it. We're looking at cogen, we're looking at solar, and we're looking at the potential of converting certain pieces of equipment from electrical to gas. So it's a comprehensive study. There's certain costs associated with that, of course, over a period of time. But we're going to be bringing that to the board as well. I think it's important to get that good view of where we stand with that particular piece. And lastly, we've been working with our architect that we worked with on South to do the roof. So that spec on East is being done for East right now. And with that, once that spec is completed, it's going to be prepared with anticipation of solar, because we do have solar that's going to be installed next summer right behind the roof replacement. So all of those things are part of the budget conversation for this coming year. We are meeting on December 3rd as an administrative group to talk about all of this, and then the following week on the 9th, the board will be introduced to all of these ideas and concepts.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Keating. Next, comments from the public. Would anyone like to speak?
Just lastly, and I promise not to make this a habit, but I truly believe the reason you saw the reactions to no change is everybody wants better sleep for our kids, but just that the alternatives that we have been given, whether it was on the survey initially sent about a year ago and now just frankly don't fit the bill. What I did notice is in those scenarios, there was none of the two-tier, which was the most expensive option, but also got all of our students to school at a later time. So I'm hoping that is something that can be revisited or something along that vein because of the complications with transportation. As I looked and did research in the papers, that $1 million difference between one of the 3-tier scenarios and 2 tiers was the $1 million, which was less than 0.5% of our total budget. It was the money actually that you gave back. It was somehow in there for whatever, but was given back to the town when Mr. Moynihan actually asked you to revisit your budget. So it's not like we didn't have it at some point. So the fact is that I do not have it all, but that's what was published in the papers was about that differential. So I just ask for all of those that I've talked to go back and look at the scenarios. In the survey that was there a year ago, there was a scenario. It was 2 tiers. It was the most costly. It's maybe not the ideal one, but it certainly would put out there, but it was not included in this last exercise that you did in October to get that reaction from the community. I also want to say I applaud you for bringing in the community. I think things have gotten too late and too early all over the place. My 10-year-old has removed himself from basketball, which is really sad because it required him to be at practice at 9 o'clock at night, and that he deemed was just too late. And so I can only imagine the start times for the facilities, for hockey, for football, for other things that require the facilities in this town may not change just because we change our school times. And so we're going to go through all this rigmarole and try to make things great and not necessarily have the town on us. So I applaud you for going out and doing that. And lastly, could you look into out of the box, like electric buses and solar? They're out there. They're things that maybe that is the solution.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening. I just want to start by saying congratulations to all of the new Board of Ed members, and thank you all for your service to the community. We are extremely appreciative of the time that you give to our kids. I just wanted to say health and wellness. We hear it a lot. What does it mean? Who do we rely on when it comes to the health of our children? Doctors. We rely on the medical community. the doctors who spend years studying pediatric health. That's who we rely on. Why are we not listening to the medical community now? Shouldn't we be emphasizing the need for this change for the health of our children? Multiple medical professionals have stood at this podium to emphasize the need for later start times in this community for our students. Dr. Lutzy, you said we keep hoping for clear direction on this issue, but it's proving difficult. No doubt, scheduling is complicated. But the AMA, the CDC, and the American Academy of Pediatrics have all given very clear guidance on the importance and urgency of this issue. Local pediatricians here from New Canaan and medical professionals have stood up and emphatically said that later start times do work to achieve more sleep for the students. So please, don't give up on this issue. We can do this together. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Next is announcements and future business. Dr. Lutzy?
So the board's next meeting is Monday, December 2nd. We will be talking more about the elements that are coming together in preparation for our budget. And we may or may not have an update on Keppel? I do have technology here, but I don't think we're going to do a technology update because, as we spoke before, I think when we do a technology update, we'd have something with Schoology, and what we're looking to do is to create a more interactive experience for the board with that. So it'll be a little more challenging than just putting together a presentation. I'd like the board to experience Schoology a little bit and be able to understand more firsthand why we're so excited about it. So we might shift that off. We'll talk a bit, I think, about capital, but I'll get back to you on it. Really, as we get into December, as we mentioned before, the second meeting of the month will be our budget workshop, and then the third meeting of the month, or the third Monday of the month will be our second meeting. We'll be looking for some more direction from the Board of Ed as we go into the holidays in preparation for the presentation of the superintendent's budget in January. So time flies. But, yeah, we'll see you after Thanksgiving.
Great. Thank you. All right. Adjourn. I have a motion to adjourn. Penny, second. Brendan? Okay. Thank you. Oh. All in favor? Yes.
To adjourn?
To adjourn.
Unanimous.